The TCG Design Theory podcast is part of the Booster Pack Network. For more TCG-related content, visit theboosterpacknetwork.com. Hosting for this show is sponsored by Category 1 Games, the go-to shop for all of your classic TCG needs. Find your favorites or discover something new at category1games.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the TCG Design Theory podcast. My name is Jay, and today we have a very special guest, Chuck Kallenbach, who is a veteran game designer for trading card games and collectible card games. So he's a former game designer with Decipher and Sony Online Entertainment. You'll know him from projects such as the Lord of the Rings TCG, Star Wars CCG, and Star Trek CCG, as well as some online and digital projects that he's done, like the Star Wars Galaxy trading card game, Free Realms, and the Legends of Norath trading card game. So Chuck, thank you for being here today, and I can't wait to get started. How are you?
I'm great. I'm glad to be here, Jay. I'm excited about this.
Yeah. The camera's obviously going nuts.
Yeah.
But yeah, so first question, so obviously Rand's interviewed you about 2 years ago, and kind of got into the history of all the projects you've worked on and things like that. And you did go into a little bit about how you got into game design, but if you want to just kind of give us a quick summary of how you got into the design field and what kind of sparked your interest in pursuing that as a career.
Right. I was playing games. I mean, everybody says they play games with their family and stuff. Well, my family played a lot of games. So we played chess and canasta, and I had a real love of card games coming out of that. So I also got into board games really heavy. Simulation Publications back in the 70s. I think at one point I had 300 of their games. And I got to know them. I mean, there's no internet in the 70s, obviously. So I would correspond with them, or if I found out they were coming to a nearby convention. At one point, we lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Michigan. In Detroit, they would have two big conventions every year, and SPI was always there because they were coming from New York. And I would be the guy that would sit in their little seminar and say, "Anybody have any questions?" And I go, "Yeah." And I ask them a question, and they go, "Anybody else?" I go, "Yeah." And they said, "Maybe you'll find somebody else." And there was never anybody else. And I ask a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. So did I have at this point a burning desire to be a game designer? No, I really didn't. I love games. I love playing games. I was not the kind of guy that had a lot of amateur game designs all over the house, but I trusted my friends. I totally didn't do that. I played games with them. I did. Even today, rather than working on a game, I'd much rather play a game. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that went on for some time. And then in the 80s, I became involved with the Traveler role-playing game from some guys in Illinois, Game Designers Workshop. Not the British one, not the miniatures guys. So I did some playtesting for that. That was probably my first playtester credit, was in one of their supplements for Traveler. And then we had our own company, Paranoia Press, and we made supplements as well. We actually got to the point with Paranoia Press, it was doing great. It made like 15 grand one year. That was profit. And we were like, we could quit our jobs and do this. But we both had a family, and we both kind of looked at each other and go, I don't want to do that. You got to make that loop. There's got to be leap. There's got to be a leap of faith, and we didn't have the faith. So that didn't happen. I went on to playtest some more things for Game Designers Workshop, as Cadillacs and Dinosaurs and the Proto-Dimensional Handbook for Dark Conspiracy and all that kind of stuff. I wrote a source book for Foss's Shadowrun game and submitted that to him, and I had written about 32,000 words, and they said, "This looks pretty good, but we need 64,000 words." And I was like, well, I can stretch it, but I don't know if I can stretch it that much. So that never really happened. It's still around the house here somewhere. Eventually, I got involved in the, I guess it was the Star Trek. I was at a friend's house, and we were back in St. Louis at this point. My wife worked for a guy that ran a game shop. So they had a party, and they invited the guys from Mayfair Games. And at one point, they gave an envelope to Dave, and Dave looked at it and threw it at me, and he said, "You like to play games, play test this." And that was Star Trek CCG. So I did that, hooked me up with the Mayfair guys, hooked me up with the Decipher guys. Back then, everything was, of course, papers and spreadsheets mailed back and forth. And I got online. There was the Gene was the bulletin board service back in the 90s. And I was active on their Star Trek board, and they had started up a Star Wars board. And they said, "Do you want to play test Star Wars?" And I said, "Yes." So again, back and forth with the notes and things. And I got like a spreadsheet, and then one of the first card I ever had published by Decipher was a card I had written in the margin of one of these things. What about this? At this point, I hadn't asked him for a job. I'd been a graphic designer for 20 years. That was what I was trained in. I have an art degree. So, but at some point they said, "How would you like to come here and work for us?" And I said, "Oh." So I called a family meeting and I said, "Family, we're going to move to Norfolk, Virginia." So I had been there. I'd seen it was a nice place, but they hadn't, of course. So that was a big jump. And in 1997 was when I started with Star Wars and Star Trek, working for Decipher. So obviously this is all paper at that point. So yeah, I guess that's how it happened. There's a lot of serendipity and good luck that got me there. But yeah, that was very exciting. I went to Gen Con every year back then, and I was in 1996. I think I was it must have been 97. I was at Gen Con, and I was very excited because I met the Decipher guys there, and I said, "Yeah, I'm going to come and work with y'all guys." I said, "I'm going to be there in a couple months." So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that 1997, I guess, was when I became a game designer for real.
Yeah. So, and that's interesting to hear that, kind of people talk about, okay, breaking into game design, breaking into the game industry. And a lot of the stories that you hear are, well, I had a passion for it. I wanted to play games. I play tested games. And then someone was like, "Hey, do you want to just come help us design?"
Right.
So I think that's incredibly interesting. So, I think I forgot to mention the topic at the very beginning of the episode, but
Sure.
let me
Go
go ahead
ahead.
and get into that.
Yeah.
Which is, we are comparing the difference in designing physical games versus digital games. So
Right.
some of the design opportunities and challenges. So with that, I do want to ask, you had your experience at Decipher
Yeah.
with some of these physical card games, and you eventually made the jump into the digital space. So was there a choice that you made to want to work on the digital side of card games, or was it, hey, I had an opportunity with Sony Online or whoever, and they kind of wanted me on, and I gave it a shot, and then I just kind of stuck with it since. So what was kind of your story behind that?
There was a company in Denver named Worlds Apart that was doing. They had done an online version of our Star Trek CCG, of the paper CCG. So we would talk to them about, what does this mean? How can we implement that? Working on the UI for that game, and they started doing a Lord of the Rings trading card game, which I had worked on the design for that, and a couple of the sets. And it was Tom Lischke, who I worked with there. It was he was the one that was the liaison between the two of them. He once designed a card for, who was it? I don't know, some crazy wizard guy from Lord of the Rings, and it was called "Screw You, Worlds Apart," because they always told us, "You do whatever you want, and then we'll follow it on the online game. We'll figure it out." So Tom had made some horrible gameplay design that would never work in Worlds Apart, but they did it. They did it, to their credit. So as we were barreling along and went through after Lord of the Rings, there were a couple other games that we were working on at Decipher, and then the bottom fell out of Decipher due to some embezzlement and bad things. So I contacted this guy at Worlds Apart with Scott Martins to see if he had. I contacted him right away because a friend of mine lived in Denver, had grown up in Denver, and he was going back, and he said, "Well, I'm going to talk to this Scott guy." And I said, "Yeah, you should do that and put in a good word for me." So I talked to him, and he said, "We don't have anything." I said, "Okay." So I did a couple more freelancing jobs here and there, and worked on the Battlestar Galactica CCG. That was a lot of fun for Whiz Kids. Flew up and worked in for 3 months. I was in Seattle, in Bellevue there. Another great bunch of people working for Jordan Weisman. He's a great guy. Anyway, So I get to finally I get the call from Scott, and he wants me to come to work in Denver. And it's not for Worlds Apart, it's for Sony Online Entertainment. At that point, Sony was buying Worlds Apart, and they were getting to control that. They didn't do the Lord of the Rings game anymore, but they had a couple other things going on. So when I got there, they had a Stargate CCG that was physical, and they were designing the physical part and the online part at the same time. So again, they were designing physical cards knowing that they were going to go online. So I didn't do much of that design, but I imagine there was constraints involved. And they had another game, Pirates of the Caribbean, which was a miniatures game online, which was a lot of fun because it was a miniatures games don't have a very high bar as far as the rules making a sense. I think that in a role-playing game, I'm going to give you some role-playing rules and you're going to throw them all out and use GURPS or something. So role-playing is like whatever. Miniatures is like one step below that, where you find a lot of miniatures players will go, well, I'll let you have this one because you let me have the other one last turn. That's a lot of this horse trading stuff. So it's not ironclad stuff. We had to make it ironclad to make it online. So that was crazy. I got to design some vocal sounds for that game. Anyway, so we're working on that. And Paul Denon, who I was working for there, was the design director, and still is at Direwolf. So SOE, he said, we have a game called Auto Assault, which was an old, I think it was a MMO. Very few people know about that. So they had developed an online game for Auto Assault. And he said, we're going to redevelop this. We're going to reskin it, and we're going to change it to an EverQuest game. So eventually we moved out to San Diego. He started working on Legends of Norath. And he said his first question was, well, is this digital only? You have to tell me right now. They said, well, what do you mean? Is it digital only? I want to design this game with that we're obviously holding themselves back with Stargate. So a couple things come to mind there. First of all, obviously there's things that you can design when you design a paper game. It has a game engine, and you work out all the intricacies of that, and that tends to evolve as the game goes on. But things get much tighter when you make an online version of that. But the rules burden on the player is less, because it's like if you were playing and there's an expert judge right there all the time to say, no, you can't do that. If something doesn't light up in your hand, you can't play it. So it's kind of a give and take kind of situation there, where we can do more as designers and expand the possibilities for the game. For example, in Legends of Norath, there was a light and dark system where you could keep track of light and dark cards you'd played. When you got to a threshold, you would be boom in your light, and you could do light things, and vice versa for the dark stuff. You could do that with the paper game, but it would have been really confusing with everything else going on. And let me mention a corollary to that is right now Magic the Gathering, they have the day and night cards, which I play on Arena, and it keeps track of all that all the time. But sometimes you'll have a card plop down, it's day bound, and it's daytime. And of course, Arena puts up a little flaggy thing. I don't know what they do in paper, but you have to keep track of that for the whole game, because you might need to know that later. That's an example of something that really, I think, works better digitally than physically. Anyway.
Yeah. So I know kind of everybody kind of understands, like, okay, well, with digital you can do more because it's keeping track of things for you and everything like that. So and correct me if I'm wrong, but Legends of Norath was a digital only game.
Yes.
So and you guys kind of evolved that from something else, but you were also kind of like building it up as its own thing. So compared to some of the things that you have to think about when you're starting a design for when you're building off an IP for a physical game versus a digital only game, are there some things that were just not there, obstacles that you didn't run into when really launching that project?
Well, I think at that point they had already designed a couple of online interfaces, so they were had the basic stuff down: shuffling, drawing, whatever, playing permanents over here and playing some other permanents and playing interrupts and things. For example, from Auto Assault at Legends of Norath had 2 zones where you could attack. It just gave a little more depth, so that you could say, I'm going to attack you over here, you're going to defend me over there, or whatever. It's the Decipher games, almost all of them had locations were very, very important. And that's not something that most TCGs, paper or digital, really worry too much about. But so it was kind of a shorthand version in Legends of Norath. The other thing that we had to come up with, and this was a large part of my career on everything I worked on, was writing and editing, both in terms of editing, for example, game text and coming up with the lexicon that you need for the game, and comprehensive rules. I looked at Magic's 32-page comprehensive rules, and I came up with about 4 pages for our games at Decipher, but it covered all the corner cases. And also, when we got to Legends of Norath, they said it's going to be based on EverQuest. I said, okay, I played a little EverQuest, fine. And they said, we need our own story. It wasn't just we weren't just going to interpret, like doing a Star Wars game. You have Luke and all these other people, but we were going to create our own characters and go from there. So I had to come up with, it was the Oathbound was the first set, and that was our plan. And then I went and I wrote, basically, because there were light side and dark side scenarios for every set, 10 of each. So I wrote 20 scenarios for every set for, I don't know, a dozen sets or whatever. And I wrote them in a text that spoke to the player in first person. So they were always called them Oathbound, because we didn't know if you were male or female. We didn't know if you were a warrior or a wizard. So it was just, well, Oathbound, I see you followed me here to my lair. So there's lots of writing that went on there. And I got to, I remember after doing many, many sets and feeling pretty burned out, I ran downstairs and I said, I have an idea for the next set. And they said, what is it? And I said, dragons. Everybody said, yeah. And then we were done, and I wrote a set with a lot of dragons. So I got a lot of freedom there. It was really great that I got to do that. So at that point, I really was doing less of the turning out cards, and I was doing more turning out stories at that point, and doing lots of editing for merchandising and stuff. And Legends of Norath was the first online thing we could do that was completely online. It eventually had a raid system where you could have 4 players playing together co-op against a big bad guy. And there were a bunch of different zones on the battlefield there. And there was a way of scrolling back so you could see everything. It was a little flaky, but it worked. And it was pretty cool. And we had to try and balance things for that. And we would basically put up the scenarios, and they'd last about an hour after we play tested them for dozens and dozens of hours, making sure that nobody could break them. The old 10,000 man play test, as I used to call it.
Right.
They break it in about an hour. We just watch them do it. So,
of course.
I think that there were a lot of things that we could do there in terms of things like special effects and things too. I mean, there were lots of sounds and things too, which is great. I don't know how many, when I watch the Magic players play, the Pro Tour, they don't really make a lot of sounds. So I never hear blast or fire or anything.
Right, which is a shame. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, they should. So we eventually developed that. I think we had talked before in your questions about making changes to the game. We never had bans at Decipher. At Decipher, they said we're never going to ban a card. We occasionally, very rarely, would actually errata a card. One time, we actually sent out copies of the card that we errated, but only the one time. So, for example, we had cards called Sense, Alter, and Control, based on Jedi powers, that were basically counter spells of the game. And they were horribly broken in the first set. And then we would make some kind of magic bullet card, some card you put on the table that would fix this problem, and it never did. And we ended up making like 20 cards to try and fix these cards, because we did not ban anything. That was just their philosophy. I think that was probably a point of differentiation from Magic at that point. They said, we're never going to ban a card. And as a designer, I wish they had. So
it's kind of interesting as a player, like, having a card where it's like, this happens to be a banned card, but it's still nice because it's a collection. It's a collectible game. It's not like you have to just get rid of it. But no, that's very interesting. Kind of thinking of putting a band-aid on it, and then another band-aid and another band-aid. and all of a sudden you're dealing with the tower band-aids. That's just like this is not looking so great.
Did not
So
work too well. No.
um but yeah, so in speaking of that, talking about your Decipher days, you know the with the benefits of a digital design being, things keeping things in track for you, or in track of stats,
Mhm.
and then with the special effects and all the things that you get with like a video game type setting.
Right.
um what are some of the things that a physical game from from a design perspective, from a player or designer perspective, that get lost in translation when you're playing a digital only game?
There's a lot of for me, in about, I guess about 2005 or so, when I started working for SOE. At that point, I didn't see a lot of new TCGs coming out in paper. Magic was still there chugging along, and there were a few other things going along, but there was a tremendous boon. I remember, I guess in about 2003, when we took our God Hack Enemy game, based on the Japanese game
Mhm.
and anime, and I talked to one of my friends from AEG who made Legends of Five Rings, and I said, "Well, you guys had that initial D game." I said, "Yeah." I said, "There's like 5 of these things coming out." And he said, "Yeah." And none of us knew that any of the rest of us were doing that. So things were cooking in 2003 from that point. But like I said, I went to Gen Con every year, and around 2005, 2006, it looked like it was drying up. And I really
Mhm.
wanted to get into the video game end of the game. I knew that there were people that were putting video games online because I knew about Worlds Apart with what they did with Lord of the Rings. So I wanted to get on with them, and I wanted to do things. I felt like that was going to be much more popular.
Mhm.
And I think, with the exception of Magic the Gathering, there's been some recent games that have come out, which I understand are doing well and have organized play, but
Mhm.
not on the, obviously not like Magic or the Arena version of Magic. So that was my point of view there. I really wanted to get into the online stuff. I'm not a programmer.
Mhm.
Between jobs, when I had the headhunters looking for me, they said, "Well, you're a game designer, you know C++." I said, "No, listen to me. I don't know. I don't program." Which at this point would almost be called a narrative designer. I think
Mhm.
maybe that's a more of a accepted term.
Mhm.
Uh, but I think that I think the idea of having the scenarios that we wrote for all of our games at SOE had about 10 or 20 scenarios that you could play. So we had single player games, single player content that could be run through.
Mhm.
Hopefully was uh, uh, friendly to new players as well, helping people learn how to play. At Decipher, we were horribly bad. I don't, the Decipher, there were obviously starter decks in the first set, and then we didn't have starter decks again until Death Star 2 was years and years and years later. And we would ask people at conventions, just as a survey, we'd say, "When did you start playing?" And they'd go, "Premiere, Premiere, Premiere, Premiere." Of course you did, because so that's not a way to expand your player base.
Mhm.
Um, so we made also new starter decks, and then the single player content, which I think got more people into our games at SOE.
Mhm.
Um, and we also branched out into um, again, those two games, the Legends of Norath and Star Wars Galaxies, were both based on MMOs that were already being made by SOE. And I got to make up Star Wars stuff at that point, which I hadn't done much of um, back at Decipher. We named a lot of things and named
Mhm.
things after our dogs and cats and stuff.
Right.
But like, I was writing a scenario, uh, and the Lucasfilm guy wrote back and he said, "You can't do that." And he said, "What if your world destroying device was on a Star Destroyer?" And I said, "Well, that's cool. That was the only time that any licensor has ever said you can't do that. And by the way, what if you did this?" Because Lucasfilm was the best.
Mhm.
They were just the best. So there was a ship there called the Conqueror, and it had a giant, like, Death Star like gun in its belly. We had, the artist drew pictures of this thing. I got to make that up. Um, I think that I'm trying to think if anything that we made up. Every time there's a new Star Wars movie, I go and watch, and I wait to see if there's going to be somebody that I
Yeah.
named pop up. Hasn't happened yet, but I have hopes. You
Mhm.
see things used in other games, like somebody that Starship pilot
Mhm.
was used in the Star Wars miniatures game, Star Wars Armada, I think, that
Mhm.
has ships. Yeah, so they have pilot cards, and she was on one of those, which was awesome. So anyway, so that gets us up to, yeah, another thing that we did, they wanted a really simple game. Club Penguin was hot at that point,
Yeah.
and SOE had a online game supposedly for kids
Mhm.
called Free Realms, which was completely their IP. So they wanted a real simple game like Club Penguin, and Club Penguin was really simple. So we came up with the rock, paper, scissors thing for Free Realms. And so that was another TCG that I designed it from the ground up for an original IP, but it really wasn't a very good game. So I'm not going to take too much credit for it.
Gotcha.
That was, as things are, or things were at SOE, that game system was used to make a Star Wars game as well, a Clone Wars scenario Star Wars game. So I've been watching those and was pretty hip with all that stuff. So we did a
Mhm.
couple versions of this game or that game in a different format. But to get back to the errata situation, it was just a question of getting the word out when something changed. Because I mean, everybody knows that certainly back in the olden days of Magic or the early days of the Star Wars CCG, you would come to a tournament with your Asteroid Sanctuary deck, and they would go, "Oh, listen, that's been changed," and then you basically would go home because you couldn't play your Asteroid Sanctuary deck.
Yeah.
So those paper erratas, which never really worked, were pretty
Mhm.
shocking. Which is why Magic just bans things. I mean, you still, after the bannings next week for Magic, there's going to be some cards that aren't going to work in your paper Magic game, and then you're going to go to your local Friday Night Magic, and they're going to say you can't play that deck.
Mhm.
So it's still a problem. It's a horrible thing, and we never want to do it. But the art of game design is to push things right to the edge of being a good card. We
Right.
need to make exciting cards. They don't all have to
Mhm.
be that way, but certainly a lot of them have to be exciting enough to get people to try something new. Anytime
Right.
you try something new, sometimes it turns out bad.
Right. Yeah, and I think one of the most interesting things I've heard in terms of just game design in general, but especially trading card games, is you have to um, you have to aim to make content and cards that people either love or hate. If you make everything kind of just in this neutral gray area where everybody's like, yeah, it's balanced, it's a game, it works. If you're not getting those visceral reactions of someone who, those triumphant moments, those emotional reactions from people just who they draw that one card and they're like yes, and their opponent sees it and they're like no. Then that's what you're aiming for. And like you said, you're pushing it right up to the edge to where it's like this card's a little bit broken, but it's super fun. So I don't really know, I guess we'll just kind of like see how things play out.
That's what you
um
do as a designer. It's really, really hard when there's a dozen or so sets out there and there's you maybe having a
mhm,
card universe, even if it's restricted like standard is, and everybody did rotation. We did with Lord of the Rings TCG too. It's still 1,000 cards and you don't know.
right.
And we do hundreds of hours of testing, but everything is not tested against every other card. And you'd like to think that there's some way to do that with a computer, but I don't know what that is. If
Well,
it's, it
with
would be
AI,
great.
these, now coming up, who knows? But yeah, so kind of going back a little bit to what you said before in terms of, you really wanted to kind of get into video games. Was that decision kind of just because you had a general interest in video games, or was it because you had frustrations as a designer in terms of like, creating, the physical products and wanting to do more with them, but just simply couldn't because of those restrictions? Is there a specific reason why?
It definitely became the preferred way for me to go after we'd done Legends of Norrath, and I saw some of the things that we could do. Uh, and it's not, I don't know, there's a lot of quality of life stuff, but just the idea that you can add another game mechanic where it's kind of like devotion is in Magic, where we were counting how many times you played light side cards, and then
Hmm.
that would be very fiddly to do in real
Right.
life. But we were able to add all that. There was a great deal of depth with that particular mechanic. Um, so that's what I want to do. Mostly my motivation, my prime motivation was fear, because it really looked to me like I looked to me at that time that the physical is drying up and we've got to go with digital. That's the way of
Hmm.
the future. And
Right.
that's where I wanted to go. Magic, however, it still proceeds and flies in the face of that. but they are, I think, the one exception, really.
Right. I mean, you kind of have some privileges there when you're the guys who launched the whole thing. So
And you're the 800-pound gorilla in the room, or what
right.
have you. I mean
Well,
that in a good way.
yeah. Well, you got all that money to throw around and stuff. So, it's like they can kind of try things, and if it doesn't work out, it's those impacts don't really hit them as hard as other creators. So
And they're trying things, obviously, with new art treatments.
Mhm.
We had variant cards, but boy, not many in the history of the games that I worked on, which
Mhm.
was years ago. But Magic's really pushing that to the limit. I think it's great because everybody gets all upset because, well, this card has 10 versions of it. I said, well, are you a collector? No. Well, then what do you care? Just get your one. And, everybody
Right.
likes to complain about things that they don't actually want.
Mhm.
There's also this idea that Magic has spent a lot of time making these variant cards, and they're not the time that they spent on that could have been spent on designing some more cards for the next set. No, those aren't the same people. That's not how it works.
Right. Very, very different amounts of time, I imagine, and
Yes.
skill sets that go into those two different things. So.
Yes, and skill set. Right. Now,
Mhm.
sometimes do the designers go to the art team and say, can we do this? And vice versa. Does the art team go to the designers and say, can we do this? Sure. But yeah, it's not how that works. So it's
Mhm.
not sucking up any design time for that.
Right.
But Magic is trying some new things with different size packs,
Mhm.
and it's interesting. Always the first time you do it is there'll be a lot of people that don't like it. But I think Mark Rosewater said once that if I do something and everybody tells me it's great, that really worries me a lot, because there's got to be some people that don't like this. I mean,
Right. Exactly.
and we had this, and Magic really has expounded on that. But we are making cards that are going to be used to put in starter decks, and they're going to be used in a constructed format where people can do whatever they want, and they have big collections of cards. It's going to be used in draft formats. We were slow to adopt that at Decipher, but we got it going. So every card is not for everybody. I mean, that seems obvious to say that, but I think a lot of people don't get that.
Right.
um,
Exactly.
and the hardcore guys were always like, I'm going to give you a set of 180 cards, and you're going to play with these 6, and the rest of them are not going to make it into your deck. So,
Yeah.
that's the way it goes. You try to make new keywords or
Mhm.
mechanic, like things like, for example, in Magic now, the soldiers, something tribal that make people want to get more of that thing. What we found out with Star Wars and sales was that our Hoth set was the first one that really brought the sales back up. It was like every time you make a set, the sales go down a little bit, even if it's Star Wars. But Hoth brought it back up because Hoth had peculiar locations for the base, and it had snow speeders and walkers and things that you couldn't get otherwise,
Mhm.
because we were so tied to the movies. They hadn't showed up in the movies before that. So that was a kind of a lesson for us in terms of making new stuff and making new sales. But anyway, so yeah, it was mostly fear for my part. That I thought this digital stuff is just going away, man.
Right.
Even today, if I was going to work on a game, I would feel much more confident working on in a digital game than a physical game.
Of course.
If you're the guy, Flesh and Blood, is that the name of the game that came out
Mhm.
recently?
Yep.
It
Only
looks
physical.
great.
Yeah.
Looks great. People seem to really like it. I would not want to be on that team because I would still be scared that it's not going to do as well.
Mhm.
I mean, Direwolf has their Eternal game, which they had just come up with right before I started working for them, and it's still going, and it looks great, and it's their IP, of course, so they can do whatever they want. Also, Decipher had just started a game based on their own IP right before the collapse of Decipher, which I got to work a little bit on, and that was great. That was really a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But it had a terrible name, which I actually fought for at one point. It was Wars TCG. I thought that would be a great name because it would tie it back to Star Wars.
Mhm.
It's a terrible name. Every time I look at it, it gets worse because you can't even, when you can't search for the game on the internet, it's pretty bad.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
lessons learned.
Right. Of course. And so, I think, as we're kind of talking about some of the things that are less fear-inducing, some of the things that are a bit easier with digital games and being able to do that. Talking about the early to mid 2000s, but also very much today, is it's simply true that with a digital game you have easier buy-in for your customers. You have a much wider reach. Um, and you can do a lot more things with it. Yet you still see a lot of prevalence with physical game or physical only games coming out, and people still buying into those. So would you say that with those comparisons, is it that physical games, um is it that tactile sense of actually holding your cards and opening up booster packs and things like that, that you just can't replicate on a digital platform? Is it that kind of a thing that we're seeing prevailing for these physical games? And how much of that was a factor when creating some of these games, in terms of like getting that feeling of collectability, um and randomness and things like that into your digital game? Like, how much of that was a factor?
Well, we tried to replicate some of that. There was always a pack opening display
Hmm.
in the game. When I worked after I spent this much time on a lot of card games, I went to work for Madden for EA Sports, and there were had a digital game called Madden Ultimate Team, which
Hmm.
had packs that you could buy, and they started to. You see now that some of the packs that Magic has are very complicated. This slot is this, and this slot is that. Now, there's always been 2 or 3 slots in a pack. I don't think anybody really thought about that, but that's how it works. There was like this slot came off the rare sheet, and these twos came off the uncommon sheet or whatever.
Hmm.
So now they're getting really complicated. Some of these collector booster things for Magic, where there's slots for this and this and this and this, and you might get this in this slot, and they're posting all the odds. And I figured out that with just a basic pack, I think for Madden 15 for Ultimate Team, and they had dozens and dozens of different kinds of packs as the season went on, there were 2,900 possible cards that could show up in this pack because it's all digital. They weren't particularly broadcasting to people. I don't know.
Hmm.
There is a question: is that legal? I don't know. Magic is becoming very forthright now in saying this is one of 15, this is one of 300 or whatever.
Hmm.
But the Madden packs were a little more obscure in that sense. We could do whatever we wanted. You had a chance of getting really awesome stuff. I mean, you could get a pack with 5 rares. Every once in a while, we heard something like that. That was a very unusual pack. But people bought a lot of packs. So I learned
Right.
a lot about the thing, kind of fine tuning that you can do. You could never do that in the physical product because there are hoppers of cards that feed into a pack, and they are mechanical and they are complicated, and there's a limit to what you can do, but not when it's digital. You can do
Hmm.
absolutely wherever you want.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of amazing things going on there. That was very interesting working on the Madden thing.
Hmm. And so, you know, again, everything kind of like lends itself on the digital side to, kind of like the sky's the limit. We can do these really complex things, these things that you can't, I mean, it's not impossible, but very, very, very difficult to do in the physical game. If you're gonna have a set that has almost 3,000 cards, you're really stretching there a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah, right.
But
But you talked about the tactile feel. I mean, people
yeah.
say, "Well, I like to shuffle. I like to
Hmm.
snap my cards on the table."
Right.
Absolutely, that's
Hmm.
fun. There's a game called Sagrada,
Hmm.
which is a board game that is about rolling a bunch of dice. Dice is very pretty, and Direwolf made a a mobile version, a digital version of Sagrada, and I'm like, I don't want to play Sagrada on my
No.
phone. I want to play
Right.
it with the dice. So
Hmm.
I get that. I get a little of that. Personally, for me, when I play Arena and it does all the shuffling for me and it deals my cards and everything, I'm a very happy guy.
Yeah.
Everything goes so much faster and you can play
Mhm.
so many more games. I mean,
Right.
we would get together for playtests for Decipher, and we had these cards that were printed out and put in the sleeves of playtest cards.
Mhm.
And I mean, how many games did we get in? Dozens? 100? I don't know, not a lot. But
Mhm.
that's that really helps a lot to be able to have more iterations of
Mhm.
that. And I also wanted to mention that when we were with Madden, I was working with Tom Lischke again. Tom said, we have to work on this pack opening sequence because this is very, very important. This is where somebody has spent their money, and now they're going to find out what their little treasures are. So at one point they had, and you may have seen this with other online trading card games, well, online card games, I should say, where they show you the pack and the top will rip off in animation. Yeah, that's not what we're talking about. With Madden, with Ultimate Team, there was always things were blowing up and exploding and rotating, and there was rainbows and lightning bolts and everything going off because it was like, yeah, you bought a pack, look what you got. And here's your comments, by the way. Yeah, so that's important. And the pack opening experience in from that respect, compared to Madden, the Magic pack opening experience is not very exciting. There's something called Fiore, I think, in game design, which is just flashy things that make you feel good. So
kind of give you that dopamine hit.
Yeah, right. There was a game. Oh man, I can't remember the game where you were bouncing little balls around, and when the last one came to win the game for you and take out the last guy, it would slow down and the music would swell up, and then it would start playing.
Oh, Peggle. Yeah,
Peggle. Yes. And it would start playing some Beethoven, and there would be fireworks. And I'm like, that's Fiore right there, buddy. That's awesome. Yeah, you did something. Of course, you don't have another player on the other side that's going to be, not happy about your fireworks.
Right. Yeah, it's and I was addicted to that game when it came out, but they had always, as the ball came close to the brick, they'd build it up, and you still didn't know if it was going to hit it. So you not
sometimes
only
it
have that. Right, exactly. So you not only had that huge climax of all these like beautiful visuals, but you also had this anticipation and this tension.
Yes.
That kept people engaged. So just another thing that obviously these digital clients can do. And I think of examples like I'm pretty sure everybody does it now, but Hearthstone and Legends of Runeterra and those types of games, they'll put all the cards that you get from your pack or your chest or whatever, all faced away from you, and you can click on them one at a time to reveal them. But they always like highlight that one card, and as you flip it, it shakes, and all those things happen.
But that glow from the back, that's your anticipation you were talking about with that.
Right. Yeah. And that's it's just awesome. Like, oh, I know I'm gonna get something. So it's one of those interesting things. And I do think they try to copy as much as they can of that feeling of opening a physical pack, and actually holding that in your hand and seeing the holographic or whatever kind of ultra star, ghost, rare, whatever people tend to call it.
And that's another thing too. You mentioned holographic foils. They don't. There have been people who tried to do that online, but I just don't think that that's really what that's for. Personally, as a player, I don't like foils because they curl and because they change colors. Everybody says, "Ooh, look at that! I went from blue to purple." No, I wanted my card to be one color when I bought it. I like the colors it started with. I don't need any more colors. So I'm not a fan. But I was never really a collector and trader. And I referred to one of the online games as a trading card game. And that's so wrong because there's almost never, ever trading.
Right.
I can't think of ever having any trading. So you get into systems where Hearthstone's Dust and Magic's wild cards, which is supposed to be saying that I got a bunch of cards I don't want, but it's okay because I can turn them into something else that I do want. And that economy, that's a very hard thing to make work, and it really is no substitute for trading at all, of course. But some way of I don't know what to call it, recouping some of your investment, or actually making it kind of enhancing your investment in the sense that I opened this pack and the rare wasn't too great, but I got a gold wild card, or I got some other dupe on a card in Hearthstone that I can get a lot of dust for and make some other stuff. So I think that's good. I think that the cosmetics are another thing that you can certainly have. You can certainly have different color sleeves and play mats and what have you in physical, but I think it's important to include that experience in online games as well.
For sure.
Magic changes play mats. They have a new play mat every set, and then they rotate. But we had a point where you could buy play mats, I think, in Legends of Norath, or maybe it was Star Wars Galaxies, and it would show to the opponent. The only part we had to figure out was whose playmat are we playing on. But so there's even issues with that. But yeah, people like pretty things too. So that's very important.
Yeah, I think that ties into the collectability, whether that's physical or digital. And I think in terms of trying to replicate that feeling. I know a lot of games have like a shimmer effect. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily like a hollow, but I know particularly with like Marvel Snap.
Yep.
You have a 12 card deck. Their card pool is pretty expansive, but it's not as expansive as, they don't have to release sets. They kind of just release a couple cards every month.
Yeah.
And the way that you kind of differentiate yourself there is that a card can go through just dozens of iterations of different types of rarities, and then they duplicate, and then they have some other kind of like weird effect.
Right.
And that's where the collectability comes in, and you have like a collection level that kind of shows like, yeah, this is how much I play,
Right.
kind of
That's
thing.
right. And I think
um,
that they have lots of variants, lots of art variants. That some of the artists I follow on Twitter
mhm.
will say, "Oh, I got to do a Marvel Snap card."
Yeah.
I'm very excited about that. And it's great. And I love seeing that. I love seeing the different artwork.
Mhm.
I went through, there's a really good game designers GDC talk by Ben Brode from
Mhm.
Marvel Snap. And he talks about how the game was designed. It's really good because he shows things like this is what it looked like at first, and then it looked like this. And he's got all the stages, photographed, which is great to
Mhm.
show what happens with the new game. And then you see it like the last one before the final was like it was side by side instead of facing up and down.
Mhm.
Anyway, it was fun to watch. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting for him to talk about card acquisition because I was a beta tester for Marvel Snap, and I thought card
Mhm.
acquisition was really, really tough. As a player, this was my particular focus. Where's Captain Marvel? And somebody said, she's in pool number 5, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm
At
like,
that time, yeah.
5? I just got into pool number 3,
Mhm.
and I finally got into pool number 5. And then when you start getting cards, it's random. So anyway, having looked at that as a player, as my particular, I still don't have my Captain Marvel, but uh, Ben made the point at the end of the talk that he had that their card universe is not very large.
Mhm.
It's only like 200 cards. He said, maybe I don't know. They add more, like you said, they add 2 or 3 more, but not many.
Mhm.
And they go into this high pool that you got to work your way up to get. I don't know if they have other ways to acquire cards yet or not,
Mhm.
but it's just hella fun to play. And it goes really fast.
Oh, for
And
sure.
the doubling thing I had seen before in backgammon, and I also seen it in oh man, Overpower, the original Marvel DC card game, had you get 7 wager cards. I don't know what they call them, and you
Mhm.
could wager so many on the game before it started. The doubling cube is much easier to implement and understand, but it's a ton of fun. It really is.
Mhm.
And if you wanted something you could play in 5 minutes with a tiny deck and have fun, yeah, it's totally on the mark.
Right. Yeah, no,
Absolutely,
I
yeah,
can't get enough of it, honestly.
yeah,
So, I'm
yeah,
always playing it. But talking about that, I think that something interesting that kind of just came to mind was you mentioned Ben Bro talking about the different iterations that they go through with, not only their graphic design, but their, mechanical design behind the game.
right,
And as someone who has designed a few games and gone through play testing and things like that, it's easy enough to say, okay, well, this card's broken. Let me get my Sharpie out
yeah,
and fix it, or let me just get a blank template.
right.
So being on both sides of those things, well, the physical and the digital, how is playtesting handled on in a digital sense, with you know trying to iterate fast and often, but also not having to like reprogram and redo these systems? I mean, do you guys start off and do most of your playtesting on a physical basis, or is a lot of it on a digital format?
It all starts out with paper.
Hmm.
And one of the guys I work with, especially on Dot Hack and Lord of the Rings, was Mike Reynolds, who came to us at Decipher, and he worked for Middle Earth CCG.
Hmm.
And he said, get a prototype. He said, we can talk about this all you want, and we can make good sketches and notes. But he said, get a prototype and start pushing things around. And it's always paper. It's always cardboard. I mean, maybe there's somebody out there that makes everything digital to begin with, but that seems very odd to me.
Right.
And all the mock-ups that Ben was showing were also paper. Marvel
Mhm.
Snap being a recent game, so yeah, you always start with paper, um, and it is easy to make changes that way. But when I worked at whiz kids working on the Battlestar Galactica game that we had. They basically, I would design cards and type them into an access database. And they had ways to say, this was somebody's job there almost exclusively. She would look at the database and figure out where the numbers might go in the cards, maybe. And just, so it would just automatically, like looking at a spreadsheet and saying, I'm going to make this into a card, which, I could almost do that with lookup tables in Excel, but she's very good at that. So we would have a play test, and then, later in the week, on Monday and then Thursday, we'd have another play test, and she would already have updated with whatever text we gave her. And it would have version numbers, keeping track of, which is really awesome, very important.
Right.
So I think these days you can get quickly, it doesn't look like Ben did with his game, but it looked like for us, and we were making a new game, the Battlestar Galactica game wasn't based on anything. They had used that to prototype. I mean, the WizKids HeroClix that they were making, they had cards that went with them, but they were making other games there that would have benefited from this quick prototyping and the database. It's always like, well, where's the database? And every place I have ever worked, from Decipher to Direwolf to SOE, and everybody else I worked on, I said, we need a database. We have a spreadsheet. No, we need a database. It's different. Databases are able to manipulate data much more better and make better playtesting looking cards.
Right.
So, there's a lot to be gained by that. I think you want to go, generally speaking, it's the artists that come up, once you determine where everything needs to go. Sometimes there will be some discussion with the artists of, should this go on the left or right?
Right.
Or whatever. I know somebody said, where do you put your draw deck when you're playing Star Wars or Magic or whatever? And he said, well, he was right-handed, so he would put the draw deck on the left, because he would draw from that and then put it in his hand. And he had like a flow chart or something. And I was like, I don't know. I put in the middle. I don't even know what I do. But for an online game, you got to decide that. Figure that out. I think that still, everywhere I worked, that I screamed and said we had to have a database, and they said, well, what kind of data? We just get Microsoft Access. You've got it. It came with Windows. Go look.
Right.
And WizKids was the only place I saw that being done. I don't know if any other companies. Magic has a big database of some kind, I think, at this point, and I just think that's the way you got to go.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But there was things that I jumped up and down about, and I got to do some UI designs when I worked for Madden. When we worked on, if you go back and look at Madden, well, Madden 25 was Madden 14. That's a really confusing thing, but they just decided to call Madden 14. Even on the internal documents and things, it said Madden 14, but it was Madden 25 because it was the 25th anniversary, which I think is funny, because like we had Madden 23 this year. So pretty soon they're going to get to 25, and I don't know what they're going to do. But anyway,
25 part 2.
Yes, that's right. The Reckoning. Yeah. So on 15 there was a complete UI redesign, and I had a guy come over and help me who would work on their NBA games. I learned so much about UI design from him, and how to make multi-pages and how to make them work together, and how do you divide the information up. It was really wonderful, and it's helped me quite a bit in designing UIs and all kinds of things from then on. So, I got a lot from working at Madden, and I got when I got back to Direwolf after that. I'd actually not worked for Direwolf until 2005. No, that's not right. No, when I came back was I want to say 2015 or 16 when I came back to Direwolf, which was a lot of the same guys that were working for SOE, but now it was called Direwolf, and it was an independent company. And they were doing an Elder Scrolls Legends game. And they said, how much Skyrim have you played? And I said, 300 hours.
Of course. Yeah.
Hey, that's good. Come on, you can work for us. They all knew me. They were old friends of mine that I'd worked at many of these other games. So I got to give a lot of input to that. And then Bethesda made the very unusual decision to take that game away from Direwolf and to give it to their in-house designers. And I don't think that went very well, because they had to reverse engineer everything. We didn't give them any of our code, because Direwolf's code was Direwolf's code. So So that was an interesting trip for them. But
Mhm.
but yeah, that was great. I had a lot of fun for that. And we could come up with things and say, well, this was this guy in the game, and this was this guy, and it should be a Nord, and this should be a Khajiit or whatever.
Mhm.
So that was exciting. And I think that as I was by the last place I worked was in 2019. I was working for Direwolf, and they had worked. Clank was coming out.
Mhm.
Direwolf Digital making board games sounds weird, but anyway,
Yep.
they made Clank, and they made the Game of Thrones game that I got to work on, and I
Mhm.
got to work on the Clank Legacy game. I'd never played a Legacy game before. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Those games are a ton of work.
Oh
Um,
yeah, for sure. Mhm.
um, but anyway, yeah, and they're still doing more board game adaptations into digital as well.
Mhm.
So they're kind of going all over the place, which is I think what you have to do.
Mhm.
But I just feel like with digital, I'm not a big fan of I can't even shuffle anymore. It's been so long since I played a game on the tabletop. I'm terrible at shuffling.
Mhm.
So I hit arena for a couple hours every day, and that's where
Yeah.
I get that.
Well, I think the shuffling is never something I'm going to complain about, because it's like, oh, draw a card from your deck or look through your deck, find a
Mm-hmm.
card, and now you got to shuffle it. It's like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
great. I got four more of these cards in my deck that are
Right.
gonna that are gonna cause me to look through this.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that's again, there's a lot to be said about the digital clients and kind of what they can provide as far as ease of access and making play quicker, especially when you're talking about making a digital client for a physical product. The only real differences there are, you're gonna uh, do the calculations faster, the games are going to be streamlined a bit more, um, and all of that. But talking about, kind of when a game is still kind of in its testing phase, and when you're still like, if you're making a new set or whatever the case may be, and you said you do that, you do the majority of that with, physical prototypes and all those things. What are some of the challenges with, you know, playtesting on a physical prototype, things that you can only do in a digital space? For instance, like, I know like Hearthstone, there's some things that are like, hey, summon a random totem, summon a random creature,
Yeah.
um, or here's some RNG for like a random stat increase, or something like that. How do you play test with those types of things that are going to eventually need to translate into the digital space?
I think you can do all of that. It just becomes much more laborious when you're making the paper play test, because if you want to say this guy has a spell book, and whenever he attacks, you get a card from the spell book, sort of thing, which is what Magic's been doing something like that lately. You have to have those stack of those cards right there, because
Right.
usually I think there's about 10 that it could be. So you just put a stack there, and then just randomly pick one. I don't know whether in the final game, in the digital game, if those are weighted averages or not. I don't know if with your 10 card deck, is it 1 in 10, or is this one card really hard to get? I
Mhm.
know with some of those cards you can get like an interest or recall or something. So I'm thinking maybe that's not as easy to get as some of the other cards in this guy's spell book.
Mhm.
Um, so a lot of that, I think that you would do the best you can on the tabletop, and then for example, for a little spell book like that, if you wanted to make it more granular and make some of the cards much more likely or less likely, you could do that digitally later on.
Mhm.
I think once you see, it's kind of a proof of concept with the paper stuff to begin with, I think. Um,
Right.
because you can talk about it for hours, and you can write it up, and you can put diagrams in, but if you don't throw some stuff on the table and move it around, I think you're really gonna not gonna know what's going on. Now,
Mhm.
that when I say throw things on, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to just play arena. But
Yeah.
but for a new game, you would absolutely do that. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure there's games out there that are being designed digitally first. It just seems odd. Um,
Mhm.
the other thing
Absolutely.
that I find that 1993 me would find very interesting was when I say, "Oh, I play arena for about 2 hours a day," and the 1993 guy says, "What do you get through? Like 3 games, 4 games?" And I say, "No, I get through about 20."
Right. Exactly.
You play
Mhm.
so many more games
Mhm.
with a digital client. It is the shuffling, but it's not just the shuffling. There's a lot more going on there that speeds things up. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I play especially best of one games in arena. There's a lot of them that take 5 or 6 minutes,
Right.
one way or the other. I mean, sometimes played to a conclusion in 6 minutes.
Mhm.
So it's like playing Marvel Snap all over again.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
but yeah, so testing wise, I think that You do it with paper until you're pretty sure that the concept is working. If you look at the samples that Ben Brode had in his discussion of Marvel Snap, I think that the last 2 or 3 was just arranging parts. Well, let's do it this way. Let's do it this way. Let's do it this way. And they ended up with the system they have now, which is very vertical. And it was like, how many cards can you put? How many slots are there behind each space, and what have you. And one other thing I wanted to mention that you brought up, since we brought up Marvel Snap, there's a ton of locations. Well, there was 5 that I told them in playtesting that when I see these locations, I give up and start the game over with somebody else. And those 5 locations did things like, this is going to play your cards for this game.
Right.
What else was it? And they were switch decks.
Yep. Switch decks, trade hands.
Yeah. Trade hands. Yeah.
Destroy your deck immediately. It's like, okay, cool.
That doesn't appeal to me. I understand that Marvel Snap is super fast and the variables or the variance is cranked up to the ceiling. So I get that. And some people think those things are great. That gets back to designing cards, right? I mean, I could have designed a Star Wars card that went on the table and said, next turn I'm going to play with your deck and you're going to play with my deck.
Right.
There used to be a card of Magic called Word of Command where I could look at your hand and play one of your cards, I think.
Yeah.
There's probably been more of those. So that's easier to do in digital,
right?
Obviously. And it's very clearly a mechanic that some people love or hate. There's some people that just despise counter spells, from the
right.
And you go through these long explanations of, look, we have counter spells because if we do, we can have bigger and more impressive effects. We can have Emrakul, who's a 15/15, but if you have a counter spell, you have defeated Emrakul. So it lets you. It's all part of the system. So it lets you make bigger things. The fact that you have cards that stop the other player from doing things. We used to have a thing called the NPE at Decipher, which was a non-playing experience, which basically was anything I did that made it so that you couldn't play your cards.
Yeah.
For example, I'm playing a Death Star deck and I blew up your home planet. You had all Tatooine locations and I just blew up Tatooine. So that was a negative play experience. Now, what always happens is the guy, when that set first came out and you had the ability to blow up planets, I helped a guy make a planet destroying deck because I'd been a playtester, and we went to our usual game on Friday night or whatever, and he blew up several planets. And I asked the guys, I said, how did you feel about that? To have half your locations get blown up and all your stuff lost? They said, oh, it was really cool. This is the guys that lost all the stuff.
Well, that was awesome, man. Good game.
That's right. That's right. They thought it was cool. I think that was their first reaction. I think later on it became less cool.
Yeah, it's like, man, I spent a lot of money on these cards, and I wish I didn't get them immediately eliminated.
That's right.
But
so I mean, like Marvel Snap, those were things that I really didn't like to play, but I'm sure that lots of people like them. And there's a middle ground of people who weren't probably crazy about having swap hands, but they'd put up with it every once in a while. As long as the whole game's not like that.
So right, and so one thing that is a common theme here is that with digital clients, it makes games faster. It makes them easier to kind of get through in terms of like there's none of that trudging along and trying to keep track of this or that, or again shuffling your deck, or worrying about, hey, if this card allows me to take one of your cards from your hand and play it, we're not having to talk about, hey, that's my physical property that you're touching there, bud.
That's right.
So but one thing I will say is with the digital space, oh man, I lost my train of thought.
There were, you talk about in Legends of the Five Rings, there was a rule that if I touched your card without asking you, I would lose a point of honor. Honor was a thing that you kept track of in Legends of the Five Rings.
Right. That's
if you were
awesome.
a Scorpion player, you probably didn't have any honor, so you didn't care. But it would make people very polite when they look at other people's cards, which is great. But I can tell you, when you watch and there's going to be a tournament this weekend for Magic, when you watch those guys put cards in their graveyard, the graveyard becomes a little panorama here of, these are the cards that I put in my graveyard. These are the ones that have flashback or whatever that I can get back, or these are the ones that were exiled with something else.
Right.
So again, this thing that Arena does very well. And Arena is also very good about leaving up if I have a card that makes you reveal a card from your hand, I can look at it. Actually, I see people making notes on the Pro Tour. They'll make notes because you can do that and put it back. But of course, in Arena, I can look at it anytime I want. The fact that I've seen it means that it's still visible.
Right. Or like, in their hand, it'll just be turned around, and if you click on that, like.
Right. And I can see their flashback cards in their graveyard and see when they can play those. There's a couple things in Arena that don't change the numbers like they could. It's so referential, everything. If I play a card, that means I pick one of your cards and I exile it, and now you can play it, but it costs 2 more, then the cost is kept track of by Arena. You don't have to put a note on it, which I think is what you do in physical. But there's one thing about there's some cards that channel, and they cost 1 less for every legendary creature you have in play, and it doesn't keep track of that for some reason. But I know from working at a company like that, they already know, and it's on the list. Madden in particular came out every year. I mean, they can tell you right now when Madden 24 is going to come out. It's going to be August, I don't know, 28th or something. And it's going to come out. So the design cycle on that, I started, again, they have a game come out every August, late August. I started in April 1st. And I said, I got some great ideas for for what was Madden 14 at the time, Madden 25. I said, I got some great ideas for this set. And they said, we're all done.
Yeah, exactly.
It has to, it's got to go. And the approval system for getting a console game approved is very, very hard. Both Microsoft and PlayStation were very demanding, and they wanted everything to be as bulletproof as possible. They don't want console games to have crashes.
Because they're dealing with the financial blowback. People wanting refunds and things like that. So
sure, right. And if you think about it, there's not many games that I've had on my PlayStation that actually cracked out and rebooted my console. It just doesn't happen very often at all. Because they have this very rigid approval process, which takes months. So it was hard, but they were very good at keeping track. This is what you do. I found out this is what producers do. You come up with at Madden, we had Scrum. We used Scrum there, and we would have meetings where they would use a point system. You would present your ideas as a designer. I want to do this, and I want to do it at halftime. I want to change the game at halftime. And they'd say, then you would explain it, and the engineers would ask you questions. The engineers being the programmer guys, and then all the engineers would pick a card from a deck. It was a Fibonacci deck, so it was like 1, 3, 5, 8. 13, whatever. And they would put a card down, and then they flip them over for how difficult they thought that would be to program. So the idea is there's a quantifiable number of hours we have to design this game, and because it comes out every year. So we're going to find out how we're going to spend those. And the funny thing was, when the engineers would flip over their cards, I'd tell them something, and one of them would call it a 1, and one of them would call it a 13. So they always want to talk to those two guys and then see what the other ones were too. But why did you think this was going to be so easy? And why did you think this was going to be so hard? So it all goes into the schedule. I remember talking, I had a lot of features that I wanted to put into Madden 15, I think. And I was talking to the producer, and he says, what do you want me to take out? So he only had so much time. So I had to pick something on his list to take out that I can put my stuff in. Supposedly we already knew what size it was. So I picked the thing, and he said, yeah, I can do that. Fine. I said, well, producers aren't that bad. This guy's working with me. And the other thing they had was a backlog, because 3 years after I left Madden, there were still ideas that I had that had been, you write this up and we'll put it in the backlog. And eventually they got around to it, and they got done, which makes me feel good in a very long distance way, and does not pay my salary at all.
No royalties on those ideas.
No. But it was still nice. And that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to keep ideas in your back pocket. I think Rosewater talks about that, and talks about, in this set, I tried to do this mechanic and it didn't work. And then I tried it in the next set, and I changed this and this, and it still didn't work. And eventually you'll get it to where it works and it gets done. So there's a lot going on there with the team and managing your resources. There's only so many. It's for Magic in the paper sense. There's only so many design hours that they have, and so many people they have. So
yeah, absolutely. And thinking about that, you say, like, for instance, Madden comes out, they have one game a year, but you're also talking about trading card games, even on digital clients, and you're trying to release sets. those sets having, they have to have new features. People expect new features, and those
Right.
can come in terms of keywords or a new faction or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But you also having to kind of, you know, uh, split your time up there.
Right.
And so with, adding all that stuff, obviously with trading card games, whether physical or digital, the game starts off in every game's lifespan, it starts off relatively simple and then gets more complex as you go.
Right.
Um, how easy is it to get, a bit out of control with the complexity on the digital side? Because, with the example I'll give is Hearthstone. Hearthstone, I think, is a very simple, straightforward game.
Mhm.
But there are some interactions that I have seen
Yeah.
from opponents that are just wild. It's just one card after the other, just doing these effects and everything, and it's only really possible because it's a digital client, and because it can streamline those things. But is there a line in terms of trying not to be too complex, even on a digital client?
I found that the rule in Magic, if I get an infinite loop, is that I show you what the infinite loop is. I'm going to do this and this and this, and I'm going to end up with one extra mana, and then I'm going to do it again. So
Mhm.
the tournament rule is I show it to you, and you say yes, that's a loop, and then I say how many times I'm going to do it. I can say 100, 500. I'm going to do it 1,000 times. I can say whatever I want. So these sort of infinite loop type things used to happen in Arena when it was new, and it crashed the client. It just
Yep.
it's a draw or something, or else it just crashed.
Mhm.
And now I see there's a new Obnixilis combo with another enchantment that I saw somebody playing it, and it basically, when it went off, the game ended. Now I don't know. I think they could have used a little more information, because the guy that lost, if he didn't get the loop, if he didn't realize what happened, everybody gets that when they're new. I
Mhm.
play a card and it's got an X on it. You don't know what that is, and then you take 20 damage, and you go, "What happened there?"
Yeah.
So yes, they're in some of our games in Legend of Norath and Star Wars Galaxies, and the bigger games, we had a log that you could go back through and find out what the opponent played and what it did. It would log every game instance, and of course,
Mhm.
Arena does that, but it doesn't make it a user-friendly version that you could look at. And we made that user-friendly in that case, so that you could see what killed you.
Mhm.
Um, anyway, uh, obviously, the first case in which it crashed the game, you want to fix that. And the second case now is that it happens and it goes off, and then the game ends, and the other guy doesn't know why. So I feel like I would like a little bit more messaging in the sense of a log or something like that. That's something
Mhm.
I miss playing Arena, but they probably just don't think it's worth trouble,
Mhm.
because I don't think there's many people like me that want to know every step of what happened last turn. But
Right.
I'm kind of interested in that stuff. Um, so yeah, I think that what are we talking about? I think that that's a digital thing that is, again, the rules master guy is always there. You're never going to make a
Right.
misplay.
Mhm.
There's actually no way to drop a card in your lap.
Mhm.
I don't want to
Pull one
mention
out of your
any.
sleeve.
I don't
Yeah.
want to mention any names, but that
Yeah.
has happened before in professional
Right.
tournaments.
Mhm.
We had, this is another thing at Decipher. Along with we don't ban anybody, the head of marketing said, we will not disqualify anybody in a tournament.
Hmm.
So we had a guy
Mm.
who cheated all the time, and he just acted like he knew what the rules were. And this is at a world championship tournament, and he told other people that there would be, let's say I'm playing, you're him, and I'm playing you, and I have a card that lets me shuffle my deck, and then when I give it to you to cut it, you take the deck, and because the back of the cards are slightly different, even though every Star Wars card had a lighter dark back, but they were
Mhm.
different. He would make piles of them and then shuffle them not very much, so that he could tell when they came up on the top of your deck what they were.
Hmm.
We watched this guy and we said, you can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. And he got into the finals because he was a good cheater and we couldn't stop him. And he did some things like when a character dies, quote unquote, in Star Wars, it either goes to the lost pile where it's really dead, or it goes to the used pile, which is a place that comes back around. It gets shuffled back into your deck. So he
Mhm.
would take he got his Vader killed and put him in the used pile instead of the lost pile just because nobody was noticing. Well, we were standing there and we all noticed, but they wouldn't allow us to intervene. And that's just terrible.
Yeah, that reeks of the customer's always right.
Yes.
That kind of thing, which is
Yes.
like,
not
but if they
when
say
he's cheating,
something
he's not
wrong,
always right.
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, so that's again in terms of enforcing the rules. I like that. Like my own personal judge here in the arena game is not going to let anything happen that's not in the rules already. That doesn't mean you can't bluff people or you can't do things in unusual orders that they don't expect.
Right.
But yeah, cheating is bad.
Of course. Yeah. So, I think we've spent the past hour or so kind of getting into, starting off by saying, okay, like, you design physical games, you went into designing digital games. And it's like, hey, what are some of the differences between these two things? And it's like, well, digital is just easier. It's just better. So
am I showing a little bit of my preferences too much there? But yeah.
Well, so one thing I'll kind of ask just to kind of wrap this up is, with physical games still being prevalent and all that, but there's obviously a slew of digital trading card games as well, and just a variety of different play styles, from the fact that you can like level up a specific card, to a certain degree, and it'll get more powerful in the game and things like that. What's for someone who is like where we all have to start, right? Designing from a physical place, getting those cards on the table and things like that. What kind of recommendations would you have for a designer that is, wanting to make, one of these, either it's a trading card game or an expandable card game, something where they're going to have to continuously, add to it, adapt things, balance things, and all that. From what you've seen over the past 30 years and how things have turned out, is there a lot of viability in physical games?
I feel like there's a renaissance now, especially with Disney's Lorcana right around the corner. Disney is a big player in the game.
Oh yeah,
of making games, and so I feel like, again, I don't know how to describe this, but I guess maybe that I had lived through the incredible booms of like 1995 and 2003 was another time when there was a lot of physical games that Decipher was making and other companies were making too. And I felt like this is great. And somehow between then and about 2006, I guess for me, I felt like it's done, because I felt, and again, this is probably my personal preference showing, but I felt like the digital stuff is so much fun and it goes so fast and I don't need anybody to judge me and the rules are here and it's great. I felt like, well, we're going that way. And the fact that they've several physical games have come out and are still around and doing pretty well. They're not beating Magic because nobody ever beats Magic, and they really shouldn't talk about that. But the Disney game is going to be big. I watched somebody playing it today. And I actually found them playing some cards that I thought were horribly broken. So I made there's a subreddit for Lorcana already. So I made a post and everybody said, no, they're not horribly broken. It's going to be fine. I said, okay, fine. I'll just leave my post here, and in 2024 we'll come back and say that guy was right. I don't know how it's going to work.
It's like, what do I know? I just did this for 20 plus years, no big deal.
I don't want to play that card. That's when you get deep into the Reddit discussion. You say, well, in the 20 years that I've been a game designer, they go,
yeah, exactly. You just pull out that one.
This guy?
And they're just like, oh boy.
You can't leave with that card though, man.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just rude. Yeah, I think that, I mean, obviously, I see a lot of things when you think about, I mean, you look at Magic, for example, Arena, and you look at their alchemy stuff that basically couldn't be done online. They have a lot of things that couldn't be done physical. I mean, because they have things that change, and I play a card that affects a card in my hand permanently, and they have permanent effects that affects this card, and then when it goes back in my deck, it's still coming out, which would be a piece of paper with a marker on it. I don't know. So those kind of things can't happen in the physical game. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how many people see that as a plus. Or there's a lot more people playing physical Magic than Arena, for God's sake. I mean, there's 10 times as many, I imagine. And of course, I want to play with my friends. I have trouble getting all my friends together because they're in lots of different states.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
I would love to play a physical game with them. I see people
Hmm.
getting together all the time and play some Commander. I've never played Commander, but it looks like a ton of fun.
Hmm.
And people always say, well, I can't get together and play. This
Right.
happened to us all the time when we were playing Magic early on. They said, I can't believe you play this multiplayer game that takes like 2 hours to play. And I said, well, so you're going to take your regular deck and you're going to play your standard deck against people at the shop and you're going to be there for 2 hours. You're just going to play 4 or 5 games.
Hmm.
And he'd be like, oh, yeah, I guess I was there for 2 hours. But it's a different experience for people,
Right.
whether you play a really long game or a really short game. For me, when it's 2 control decks versus each other and it's taken me 38 minutes to play a game in Arena, I find that that's long.
Yeah, because that translates to not so great in the physical part of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen games. You could when you go to time in Arena, it seems to be pretty much what would happen in your average Friday Night Magic. I think if they're enforcing that kind of thing, because I think you get a
Hmm.
45-minute timer to
Hmm.
get your match done. So I don't know. Um, but yeah. I mean, good for Disney making a physical game, and it's going to be tradable. Obviously, the
Hmm.
many versions of I've seen 3 Mickey Mouses already, and there's probably 5 or more
Hmm.
in the set. And so I was complaining about their resource system, but perhaps they have. I was given some responses that made me think that perhaps I hadn't thought as deeply as I could have. But it's just something I saw, and when none of us know everything about the game yet. So we'll see how that works out.
You
But
know,
the old game,
you say that, and I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, I think I've seen your posts on the subreddit. So,
I've only made
um,
one on the Lorcana subreddit, but I post.
yeah.
I play Marvel Puzzle Quest. I post on there all the time.
Hmm.
I used to post on Magic Arena subreddit, but it's not the signal to noise ratio is a little low for me there.
Hmm.
And not just people talking to me. I'm just talking about everything else going on.
Hmm.
There's not any good discussions there as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
The Marvel Puzzle Quest, that's another game I play every day. We're in an alliance with some friends I used to work with, and that's very enjoyable. I enjoy it a
Hmm.
lot. Very simple game, tons of variants. It's like
Hmm.
Marvel Snap before Marvel Snap is Marvel Snap. It's like Marvel Snap, but you still have a lot of cards and stuff.
Right. Exactly.
But it plays very quickly and it has a lot of variants, and that's what
Yeah.
you want. And
Hmm.
Marvel Snap has a ton of variants, and that's okay if you spent 5 minutes playing a game. If you spent a half an hour playing your game and something happens in the end, you go, "Whoops, you lose."
Right.
That's not good.
That's where it gets frustrating. Hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's the last thing I'll touch on is um, I think the real challenge is with this applies to board games and things of that sort too, because with trading card games, it's people say it's more of a business model than you're designing a card game and then it is a trading card game
Mhm.
as running as a business. But I think there is something to be said about the challenge of being able to design something so simply with minimal with the least amount of rules, I guess, possible, while still allowing a lot of um you know player interaction and things like that with the cards, trying to make a physical experience as concise and easy to learn and enjoyable. I think that's the real challenge nowadays. So I think the games that you're seeing like on the digital side, obviously can do a lot more. But I think a lot of the things you're seeing on the physical side coming out now are trying to go more of that simple route. And are those some of the things that you've seen? Because you've seen Lorcana. Obviously, there's a new announcement. We don't know a whole lot about the new Star Wars game, but some of these other physical games that are, you know, um, that are still prevalent. Have you seen kind of a cutback in simplicity, like, or trying to get back to being very simple and easy to understand?
It's really, really hard to make a simple game. It's much more easy to make a complicated game.
Hmm.
People talk about elegance. I'm never too sure what that means. It usually means people don't like lots of words on the cards. That's not all there is to elegance, but that's a thing. I am constantly amazed by um, the number of, in Magic, for example, nowadays, there's a lot of text on the card. I think Frank Karsten keeps track of how many words per card, and
Hmm.
it just keeps going up. It's just
Yeah.
huge. We used to
Hmm.
have Magic used to have something called the 7-line syndrome, which is if you play a card and it has more than 7 lines of text, I don't know and I don't care what it's going to do. You just tell me because I don't want to read it,
Right.
which was terrible.
Hmm.
So I look at Lorcana and I see, as is always the case, some of what are probably the common cards. Like here's a version of Mickey Mouse. I can tell this is the common one because the rare one's over here, and the rare one has 3 abilities on it. And it's like, I mean, the individual parts, I think they're keeping relatively simple, but Magic started that way too.
Right.
When you get to your 10th set, some of that simplicity is just going to be a problem. It's tough and it's hard. And like Magic doesn't make vanilla creatures anymore. If I showed 1993 me my 2023 deck, he would say, "Oh my God, every one of these cards does something when it comes in play. It's like every creature has an instant stapled to it." Except he would have said interrupt because it used to be called interrupts. But anyway, so complexity is a big problem. But I think that as well, anything that's been around, we had this problem in Star Wars and Lord of the Rings went 9 or 10 sets. And eventually it just takes more words. Sometimes you find something that you can do that's fairly simple and doesn't take any words. And that's kind of the purpose of keywords, of course, is to keep fewer words on the card. Everybody says, well, it just has a keyword. Yeah, that keyword says morph too. Now, would you like to tell me what that means? Because I looked it up and there's 4 paragraphs in the comprehensive rules that tells me what morph is.
Exactly.
That one was, they never got the text of that. And they try to put the rules on the cards. And I see that in Lorcana a lot of little parenthetical statements. It says, you need to do this. And then parentheses, this is what that is, which is great. And yeah, I'd love to see, I think that there are small card games. Again, my friend Paul Denham, we play games, board games once a month, and occasionally he'll whip out, there's a lot of little card games that are being made, mostly in Europe, which are very, very clever and very low complexity and low rules text. And they're great, but you can't make that into a multi-set extravaganza that you need to make money. So
right, exactly.
So I don't know.
Yeah, striking that balance has always been interesting to me because people think, oh, if you're going to make a trading card game, then you need to aim for stretching out, as long as you can go, and I wonder how much that's going to get challenged as we move forward because that's kind of like with TV shows. Just because you can stretch something 10 seasons doesn't mean you need to stretch it 10 seasons. Sometimes 5 or 6 is good enough. So, and I wonder if kind of blending the expandability of a card game with different elements of collectability is going to become kind of the new standard, at least for physical games. But is there anything else that you want to leave off on for anybody who's thinking about getting into the seemingly impossible task of designing a physical or a digital card game?
Well, my avenue was playtesting. A lot of people have gotten into the industry, such as it is. It's a very small industry, but anyway, the card game industry by doing QA. That's another way. The QA guys generally know more about the rules than I do. I was a card designer, so I kind of looked at card text in a positive way, and that I wanted it to work.
Right.
And the QA guys were like, what happens if I put 40 of these in my deck? And what happens if I do this and this and this? They were look for breaking things.
Right.
I mean, this seems trivial, but it's a big difference in the way that the QA guy looks at a game and the game designer looks at a game. Because I'm not trying to find out what happens when this is abused. I'm trying to find out what happens when it's used. And the QA guy totally the other way. And especially with the online games, it was things like, if you hit the return key, 10 times, this happens. I said, why would I do that?
I don't know, but I did it.
That's what they're testing for. The QA guys are like, they test for all that stuff. So yeah, paths into gaming. I think that the most important thing, there were opportunities to play test for me. If there are not opportunities to play test, there used to be open calls for like Avalon Hill or whatever, which say Renegade Games, in fact, has a playtester system that you can sign up for. And they have a Discord, and they will say, hey, we need playtesters for this. It helps because it gets your name in the rule book sometimes as a list of playtesters. They don't often list all the playtesters though. But I be constructive and be creative and make things as clear as you can. Communication skills are very important. And basically the reason I got pegged to be a designer by Decipher was because I made consistently constructive and fairly well represented and said and clearly posted comments on what they were doing. They didn't have to be exactly right, I think that people inside know more about things going on and what's right and what's wrong, because there's so many factors. There's a ban list coming out for Magic next week, and it's been a leak, and it's probably wrong. And there's so many marketing decisions and game balance decisions. And Magic now has a play design group, and I believe the play design group is basically looking for fun, which is really important. I don't think this card's very good. Well, it's fun to play. Does it break anything? No, let it go. Play fun stuff. Mark Rosewater always says, play the Johnny cards. Nobody likes the Johnny cards except for Johnny. And when Johnny sees those cards, he's got a combo, and it's going to be awesome. And he'll get it to go off, but nobody else will even care. So you're making things for lots of different people. But anyway,
right.
This is the same to get hired for anything. I think if you wanted to be a manager at McDonald's or something, I mean, it would be, if you could give them consistent, constructive, and quality feedback, they might take you seriously.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that scenario in my head, and I'm thinking of some things that are a bit interesting from my personal experiences, in fast food. But yeah, no, hey Chuck, this has been absolutely incredible. I mean, just the amount of insight that you can give, just in terms of like the things that you've worked on, but I mean, just the ongoing things that you have seen as a player. I mean, you're still here talking about like, oh yeah, I play this. In fact, I played this today. In fact, I'm playing it right now.
Yeah.
And it's just very interesting to hear, these types of things in terms of it from both sides, right? I mean, I would say that you've flip-flopped a bunch of times, right? Like you started as a player, you were a designer, but you were also a player, and then you designed some other things, and then now you're playing things again. But yeah, it's just really interesting to hear from both perspectives. So yeah,
I think that most of the time when you get to the game company, game company is being run and populated with people who play games.
Yeah.
And they don't just play your game, they play other games too. And they get together on Wednesday night after work, and they all play, Gloomhaven or something. Everybody's playing something all the time. So in most of the places I've worked, it's been like that. There's been a couple places I've worked where the engineers didn't play games or the artists didn't play games. And that's okay. I think, I don't know what an example would be. If I'm in the marketing department of Tesla and I don't know how to make a car, is that okay? Yeah, sure, it's okay. If you're just doing your job, that's fine.
Right.
But game companies are often filled with people who are passionate about games, and not just the one game that they're working on, but all kinds of games. Right. And that's the thing I miss more than anything. Now that I'm retired, it's been 3 years. Just the daily talk in the office with other people that are so like-minded with me that really take game playing seriously, and they take having fun playing games seriously too.
Right.
So I don't know, just be constructive. That's what did it for me.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of still the appeal of physical games is just like you said, that kind of camaraderie in the office, around the table, people getting together. I think creating those fun experiences is still something that people strive for, and it's still a really big challenge to create something that's that works, but it's also unique and brings something, no pun intended, new to the table. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Chuck, I appreciate your time. Is there I know you're retired, but is there any projects you're working on, or is there anything that where can people find you, in terms of like social media, or do you have a presence anywhere else?
I'm on Twitter, Chuck Kallenbach at Gmail, and I'm on Facebook, and I'm on some Reddit groups, but not very many. I go by many names there. I have a Substack blog, which I'm trying to get going. It's not going anywhere. So I have another blog on WordPress called I Quote Myself, where I have things like my 100 favorite movies, and I have a list of all the games I've worked on. So yeah, you can find me in all those places, I think.
Awesome.
Probably Twitter still. I quit Twitter like 3 times, but I'm still there now.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people describe it that way.
It's really different from what it used to be, but
right, for sure. Yeah, but we'll have all those things. We'll have the your social media handles and any other links in the description below. But again, Chuck, just want to say thanks. I appreciate your time coming on the show and talking about these things with me.
Great, thanks, Jay.
All right, so that was Chuck Kallenbach, former game designer with Decipher and Sony Online Entertainment, talking about the different challenges that come with designing a physical game versus a digital game. While it seems like digital is the way to go these days, I think there's still a lot of physical design space left to be explored, as well as balancing games that have both a physical and digital platform. While many of these digital CCGs have been sunsetted or are no longer officially supported, you can still find the physical products to play if you want to get some inspiration for your own designs, and that's what Category 1 Games does best. You can also trade in your collectibles for some extra cash, or even check out their weekly newsletter that contains discount codes for certain games. All of that and more can be found at category1games.com. And if you want to see, hear, or read more from the Booster Pack Network, you can follow us on social media at TBPN Content, as well as joining our discussions with the community on Discord. If you want to reach me directly, my email is j@theboosterpacknetwork.com. I'm always open to hearing more suggestions for design topics and guests to be on the show. All right, that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next time.